Thursday afternoon to you, 4 o'clock time for Sports4CLE. Thanks for joining us. Hope you're having a good afternoon. Browns getting ready to head to Pittsburgh to play the Steelers, trying to sweep the season series from Pittsburgh. Rich Eisen from the NFL Network, as well as the Rich Eisen Show. Browns' situation at quarterback with Deshaun Watson and moving forward.
Last year, we saw Joe Flacco come off the couch and win comeback player of the year with what he did in the Kevin Stefanski offense that Deshaun Watson struggled to do, had bursts of aha moments, but struggled to do. The offense was difficult to watch most of the time, and then an injury knocks him out for the rest of the season, forcing the Browns to find another quarterback, and they did, who showed the way. Then they show him the door. They welcome in Jameis Winston, and the same damn thing happens again. Honestly, just to bring it all full circle, look across the field. The other team made a massive trade with massive amounts of draft capital going out the door and massive amounts of actual capital designated to this player who they decided, when it's all said and done, to show him the door and welcome in a new era. And they're 8-5, and they just beat the team that needs to find the same damn gumption.
Let's welcome in Quincy Carrier, Untitled Unfiltered Browns coverage. So Quincy, he's obviously talking about Russell Wilson. The trade was the Broncos. That was after the Broncos game. Ironically, they faced Russell Wilson against the Steelers, and they're another team that's on the verge of making the playoffs. I guess the bottom line is, anybody that wants to sit and argue that, the Deshaun Watson experience for the Browns hasn't been bad is just not been watching what's going on with the offensive play when he's been quarterback.
Yeah, I don't think that anybody is really arguing anymore that Deshaun Watson just has been a victim of bad circumstance here, right? Like, this is obvious the problem. I mean, look, we don't even have to go back to Joe Flacco. Go back to not Jameis Winston, but Jacoby Brissett, who also was somebody who benefited greatly from being in Kevin Stefanski's system. So, yeah, there's just a whole lot of evidence to the contrary that Deshaun Watson is your best pass forward. And I think it's obvious to the organization that there's just a ton of evidence here that you just need to go a different direction. It doesn't have to be a specific direction, like it doesn't have to be Jameis or somebody like that, but it does have to be a different direction in Deshaun Watson.
So I know you've addressed this on your show as well. So it's the Browns versus Deshaun Watson's contract. And what does it mean for Andrew Berry and just your thoughts on that? I mean, it's interesting. He's got to find a way to improve this roster.
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be a lot of ways to improve the roster, right? Because the Browns have played the long game with the salary cap. They're going to be able to move money around. Like if you sign somebody a new contract, very rarely does a lot of that money happen in the first year of that deal. Usually it's spread out. So the Browns got 2027 pretty much free, empty of salary cap space. So they can maneuver these deals so that they're not hitting this year's salary cap that hard. They're going to have flexibility. Now, that doesn't mean that they could go out there and spend what did John Dorsey used to say, drunken sailors. They're not going to spend like crazy or anything like that. But if there's improvements that need to be made to this team, there are a lot of areas where you can shop for some players who might have some high upside that you can add to the Cleveland Browns. So there's going to be avenues to upgrade. I don't think that the Deshaun Watson contract puts you in cut mode, right, this offseason. There's just like 2-3 moves you can make that can easily free up a bunch of space here, right? Like if you trade Greg Newsome, that'll open up $13 million in cap space. If you cut Jack Conklin, that opens up $15 million in cap space. Just small things like that you can do to open up some flexibility now. But also, Dave, let's keep in mind, like this is not a team in win now mode anymore. So the kind of deals that would gum up your salary cap are those one-year deals where you can't really hide that money. They're not in the market for a lot of one-year deals right now. So they're going to be able to kind of figure out how they want to maneuver around this. They'll obviously scoot younger in free agency, but I think that's a fine place to be at for a team that's in the position that the Browns are right now.
So, Jameis Winston, almost 500 yards, couple of pick six, 3 touchdowns. One of them that wasn't a pick six was in the end zone last meaningful play of the game. Ken Dorsey, offensive coordinator, talked about trying to find ways to limit those turnovers by Jameis Winston.
That's just something we just got to keep focusing on, keep correcting, keep working at, and making sure that we keep our attention to detail where it needs to be in terms of the number one thing, protecting the football. And I think, Jameis is the first one to admit that, and part of that is, technique stuff. Part of that is, everybody doing their job stuff, and part of that's decision making. So there's different things that go into those things, but at the end of the day, the quarterback has the ultimate responsibility for it. Well, you don't stop coaching it. Number one, I don't think you just sit there and say, okay, it's okay, it's just the way it is. I think we keep coaching it, we keep hitting on it, why these things are happening and how can we correct them, and to make sure it doesn't happen again next time. So I think there's that aspect of it. Obviously there with, the amount of third downs and 2-minute drives and things like that, we got into a lot more throwing the ball than typical.
There's 2 things about the interceptions relative to the Broncos games. They threw the ball 60 times. You don't really want to do that. And the other thing is, Jameis Winston believes his arm can make any potential throw on the football field. For the most part, he's right, but hash mark to the opposite sideline in an NFL game, you really don't want to do that.
The problem with Jameis isn't that he's not capable of making these throws. Like once in a game, he will. It's that is he capable of making these throws on command, right? And that's been something that he's proven to not be capable of doing. Also, another thing to think about with Jameis, we got to look at him like a pitcher, right? Like, how if this was a baseball team, you got a guy in there that likes to throw 110 miles per hour. You're watching that pitch count because you're like, hey, he's going to start losing gas. Once he starts losing gas, you're going to start getting a lot of hits. Jameis Winston threw 17 intermediate passes. To get that in context, Deshaun Watson took the first month of the season to get the 17 intermediate passes. So not only is Jameis throwing the ball 58 times, Dave, he's throwing haymakers every time, right? So when he gets to 60, he might be capable of throwing a field out, but he's exhausted by the time he gets to a field out. And let's extrapolate this to a season, right? If he does this for a season, you're probably going to be exhausted or injured by the end of the season. It's part on Jameis Winston to have better throw selection, like just not throw as many haymakers as he does. But I think it's also on Ken Dorsey to keep that in mind when he's calling these plays, which is, hey, Jameis is going to take the deep route, which means we can't get in a situation where we're on plus 45, 46 plays throwing the ball because he's naturally going to throw himself out of his pitch count.
He was a hell of a closer for Florida State, by the way. He threw 97-98 as baseball pitcher. It was pretty good. He's good.
Ain't it crazy that we all forget he was a 2-sport athlete?
Oh, yeah. No.
Like, he is such a clumsy athlete. Like, when he runs, it's like, oh, he was like a legitimate 2-sport guy coming out of Florida State.
Yep, he was. All right. I know you've addressed this on your show. Options at quarterback for the Browns moving forward.
Yeah, I think the way to think about this, right? I know a lot of people see the success with Jameis, and we do the same thing we've done the last 3 years, where we attach ourselves to that backup's name, right? Dave, you were on the show with me when people were saying it would be malpractice for the Browns to give up Jacoby Brissett and not bring him back, and you're never going to find a backup as good as Jacoby Brissett. Do you bring in Joe Flacco? And you're like, oh, okay. And then we did the same thing with Joe Flacco, right? And then we did the same thing with Jameis Winston, right? We're about to do the same thing with Jameis Winston. The Browns have a good understanding when they're doing that value market at quarterback on what they need and what they can be successful with. So I trust whoever it is that they bring back. If it's Jameis Winston, if it's Sam Darnold, they decide to go out there and make a move for it. They have a good grasp on that. They have demonstrated this 3 times that they can figure it out. So whoever they bring back is whoever they bring back. So you just want to make sure, if you're the Browns, when it comes to the quarterback position, you're doing things to improve the run game around it. So whoever that quarterback is does not have to get to play pass attempt 50, pass attempt 60, like we saw with Jameis, because the reason Jameis had to throw the ball 60 times was because that was the only viable way to move the ball against the Broncos. So that, to me, is the key. You want to get a run game around whoever it is. But if you're the Browns and you're looking at quarterback, it's probably going to be somebody like Sam Darnold that you're going to be interested in, maybe somebody younger like Justin Fields that you might be interested in, or it might be Jameis Winston, right? But there's a number of names. We can even talk draft real quick if you want to. I think Carson Beck is somebody that we should really keep an eye on. He looks like he's going to fall out the first round, maybe even out the second round. I think the Browns sprint to the podium to take him in the late second or in the early third.
All right. I'm curious to this one. Again, you did this on your show. Paul DePodesta's job. Explain it to me, because I don't think anybody knows. Anytime he's the guy that's in the corner office that nobody knows what he does except he's at home, so he's working remote. Browns fans have no idea what this guy does.
The best way I have been able to describe and get this described to me from people in the know is Paul DePodesta is basically research and development for the Cleveland Browns, right? Like, he heads up research and development and looks through these different avenues and ways that the Browns can improve. Remember, he became famous for figuring out a new strategy for success with Moneyball. He's not employed here in Cleveland to do Moneyball, right? Like, that's not what he's employed to do, is to give a mandate out and tell everybody what they should do, and this is how the Browns should operate going forward. What he is here for is to look into different ways and different theories about success in pro sports, how analytics can factor into that. He gets these reports. You get them to Andrew Berry. Andrew Berry looks over them, or he has a Zoom meeting with DePodesta, and then they make the decision on if this is something they want to do or where they're going to incorporate some things going forward, right? Like, he's just another dude in the Zoom meeting, right? Like, that's basically what this is. Like, he has some input. He does have some say, but at the end of the day, football operations lie with Andrew Berry, Kevin Stefanski, and then obviously the Haslam family is going to have some say in football ops because they pay for this whole show. But yeah, DePodesta, it's more like, it's not even research development. It's because, like, they're not mandating this stuff on their own. It's also like, if Andrew Berry's like, hey, I want to see if we're drafting linebackers too old, or if we're drafting linebackers too small, can we get a study on that? That would be something that you would pass off to DePodesta, and he would try to figure out which firm gives you the best study. Like, it's really just stuff like that that doesn't really impact the people who watch the team or really the on-field product that drastically. But because it's so mysterious, and because the dude was in the movie and Jonah Hill played him, everybody thinks that he's like the puppet master behind the scenes, but he's a dude in a Zoom meeting, offering suggestions, and there's probably like 6 other guys like that in every other business.
Quincy, Carey, and I can step aside, take a quick time out as we go to break. Browns not practicing today. Jedrick Wills with his knee. Cedric Tillman still concussion. Maurice Hurst ankle. Sam Kamara concussion. Returning to practice. Juan Thornhill with calf. Jamari Thrash with a shoulder. We're going to step aside, take a quick time out. We head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason. Sports4CLE. Be right back. Stay with us.
Ted.
Hi, Betty.
Oh no, you wrapped yourself into a daze.
Holidays.
You need a break, so I got you Ohio Lotteries home for the holidays and Merry Money Scratch-Offs.
You could win up to $500,000 or $1 million. Oh, thanks, hon.
And they have games on the back. Has anybody seen my glasses?
We continue talking Browns with Quincy Carrier from Untitled Unfiltered Browns coverage. Let's head to the voicemail of Truth and Reason.
I was just wondering, why do the Browns' expectations have to be completely different than every other team in the NFL? Starting off with John Dorsey, we start off with not firing a head coach that went 1-31, and that set us back years. Now, we should not be worried about a coach that has accolades. We have a coach that has 2 awards for Coach of the Year, and he's a 500 coach, literally. We have to think that it's time to make a change. Let's say next year that we go 1-5. Stefanski's going to be booed out of town anyway, so we need to make a change.
As always, appreciate all the voicemails. Quincy, and again, I get why people are talking about making changes. Every time you make a change, you reset the type of players that you want. That's the problem. That's how you get to 1-31, because you change so many times. Every time you change, you set things back.
And let's be honest about it. The caller made a point about why are we operating on a different bar than other teams, but think about what other successful teams don't do. They don't fire their coach simply because they have a 500 record. I mean, Kyle Shanahan has close to a 500 record as a head coach, has had as many losing seasons as winning seasons in his time in San Francisco. Does that mean that the 49ers should be reactionary and fire him? Because if he starts 1-5 next year, you're going to have to fire him anyway, right? The way to build a successful football franchise is not to be reactionary about it, right? Is to be patient, is to feel like you have competent people in charge. Let those people do their jobs. And yes, sometimes you're going to get good years. Sometimes you're going to get bad years, but you just got to kind of ride it out, because the continuity tells you that that's more important for developing players. And nothing screams to me that Kevin Stefanski is incompetent. Where is the evidence that Kevin's incompetent? With Freddie Kitchens, there was evidence that there was incompetence there, right? Hugh Jackson, there was massive evidence that there's incompetence there. Does Kevin call every play that you want him to call? No, but that's not incompetence. This is a disagreement on what to do on the play, right? So, yeah, 2 coach of the years, that tells me that dude's a competent coach. He's good at his job. His peers seem to think so. The players in that locker room seem to think so. So why would you fire a guy like that just for what? What are you going to gain from it? Just a restart? Draft some new guys who are new to the system, and then spend 5 more years trying to restart? You didn't reset, you didn't set the Browns back 5 years by not firing Hugh Jackson that 1 year. You set the Browns back a couple of years by hiring Freddie Kitchens instead of Kevin Stefanski when they were both up for the same job in 2019. Hire the right guy. That's it. Once you got that guy in place, you let it rock, and you roll through some of the bad years and you roll through some of the good years. But the continuity part is just so much more important than I think people give it credit for. And if you just keep firing these guys, yeah, we could do that. We did that for 20 years, and look where it took the Browns. This is why the bar is so damn low here.
Yeah. Again, you when you change coaches, you change the type of players you're after, so you have to reshuffle the entire roster. But again, we've already said that. All right. Again, I'm curious your thoughts here. On your show, what does Jameis Winston need to do to earn a contract extension, do you think?
The stuff that we're seeing right now, raw, uncut Jameis, I like to call it, right? He gets 60 pass attempts. He's not really being told to chill out or anything. He's just throwing this thing downfield, seeing what happens. And that's all fun and good. But this stuff would hit a lot different, Dave, if this were September and the season were on the line, or we felt like the Browns' playoff chances would be hurt. And I know it would hit differently because I lived through Baker Mayfield. The 4 interception stuff, that stuff started to bug you when it happened early in the season and when you felt like it cost you games, right? Jameis has had 2 games where he's had 3 interceptions already in his Cleveland Browns career. So obviously the interceptions need to go down. But if you're Jameis Winston, I think another area where he can improve is making more sound decisions on first down. I think he gets a little greedy on first down. He doesn't take what the defense gives him, and it leaves him in a lot of 3rd and long situations. Why the Browns aren't converting great on 3rd and long and converting fine on 4th down, because they're usually closer on 4th down than they are on 3rd down. So Jameis needs to take advantage of that extra first down and just use it, right? Take what the defense gives them. I can point to 6 scenarios where that didn't happen last week. So that's my main thing with Jameis. He has to find a balance of, okay, I'm going to take a couple of risks here and there. I'm going to throw a haymaker here and there because you still want him to be Jameis, but also manage the game a little bit better because he still shows signs of being a poor manager of the game.
All right, Jim Schwartz, defensive coordinator for Browns. asked why the D is giving up so many explosive plays this season.
The problem with not being able to eliminate them is that there hasn't been a whole lot of commonality to them. Like this last one was in a deep zone. We've had given up as one-on-ones in man-to-man coverage. We've had a lot of different. If it was one thing, I think you can take steps to replace. We just, we have to concentrate on just doing our job really well, and if you let your guard down, it just proves in this league, if you let your guard down for 1 second, you can give up a 96-yard touchdown pass or a 94-yard touchdown pass, whatever it is. And, when it's all said and done, there may be reasons, but there's no excuses, and we take responsibility for it.
So, Quincy, I guess the question is, what do you think's wrong with the Browns' defense?
I mean, I think it's simple. The Jim Schwartz defense looks pretty good when the defensive line's winning on the line of scrimmage. Jim Schwartz defenses look pretty bad when you're not winning on the line of scrimmage a lot. That's just been the constant of every defense that Jim Schwartz has had that's been successful. If you don't have your defensive line playing at an elite level, then you're going to give up a bunch of busted plays because Jim Schwartz is not strong in that area. So I think it comes down to two things. One, let's be a little bit more simple with our approach to get pressure. I think we've gotten away from the plot. I've seen Myles Garrett go back in coverage and try to cover a tight end in a sim pressure. I'm like, we're getting far away from the plot. There's no element of surprise that is better than Myles Garrett rushing the passer. He's just that good, right? We need to simplify it. I compared this defense in the past to Mike Tyson back in the 90s, right? Was Mike Tyson's boxing matches like where you could tell me, Dave, did he have a complicated strategy back in the day? Like, was it this Floyd Mayweather? Was it like that? No, it was peekaboo, 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 punch you in the face, right? That is what Mike Tyson specialized in. It was simple but very effective. The Browns have Myles Garrett. They have Denzel Ward. They have really good players. And I think every year they try to get into, we're going to be a little bit more complex. We're going to be a little bit more unpredictable on defense. They go away from their strength, which is we got better personnel than you do, right? So last year they were simple, they were predictable, but they were effective. This year they're less predictable, they're less simple, they're not as effective because the sacrifice of being less predictable and less simple means that you're not just using your edge rusher to edge rush. You're doing other things with him. Myles isn't in the middle of the line of scrimmage anymore, right? Like all of these things you're going away from because you want to add some complexity and add some element of surprise to this defense. I just got to ask the question, at some point, do we figure out it's just not worth it? These dudes are just better when you just line them straight up and go.
Yeah, and that it may come to that pretty quickly. Quincy Carrier and I are going to step aside, take a quick timeout. Other side of the break, we'll turn our attention to the Browns' run game. Sports4CLE will be right back. Stay with us.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
We continue talking Browns with Quincy Carrier from Untitled Unfiltered Browns coverage. Longtime Browns beat reporter Tony Grossi, ESPN Cleveland, on the topic of what to do about the Browns' run game.
Could you make an argument to just shut him down for the rest of the year to get him 100% healthy?
I think at some point you might consider that. With 2 to go, you want him to leave this season cleanly. So then a totally rehab-free offseason, I think, would do wonders for Chubb next year. So I think with that in mind, there's a point in time where they have that discussion. I do think it's premature.
Do you think he'd be on board with that, though?
At some point he might, sure. And even if he's not on board with it, I think he would come to the realization that it's best long term.
Quincy, when you look at it, Nick Chubb is getting more and more like Nick Chubb, but he doesn't have the explosion yet. And that's not a surprise given what he's coming back from. How do you fix the Browns' run game, though?
Yeah, I mean, I think Nick Chubb will look a lot better if the run game was better and from the interior to offensive line. I think there needs to be a complete philosophy shift on the personnel acquisition strategy of the Browns offensive line from here on out, especially in the interior. For a long time, the Browns got smaller guards, more athletic guards and centers because they like to pull those guards and centers and run a lot of wide zone, right? They were going to be on the move. That's why Wyatt Teller is here. That's why Joe Bitonio has worked so well in this system. Same thing with Ethan Posick. But now the Browns don't do that as much. Now they run out of shotgun. When you run out of shotgun, you're not going to pull as much. Doesn't make as much sense. You're going to do a lot of man blocking to try to take advantage of some delayed handoffs or take advantage of the pressure that your quarterback can create on the run game by being an athlete themselves. That requires you to have bigger offensive linemen. You look at the Browns offensive lineman, Wyatt Teller's the strongest one. I see him get reset constantly when I watch film. They're just not powerful off the line of scrimmage. You're not getting any push off the line of scrimmage. And they're old, so they're not as finesse as they once were. So the wide zone stuff just isn't effective enough to live off of. I think if you're the Browns, you need to look at getting a big guard like Mekhi Becton or somebody like that, right? Getting a bigger center, getting that in the draft, right? Getting bigger, stronger on the offensive line and younger, hopefully, in the interior of this offensive line, I think will do wonders for your run games, because I don't think it's the run game block schemes that are a problem. These are run game block schemes that every team runs, and they run them successfully, sometimes even against the Cleveland Browns. I think the issue is that we don't have enough power on the line of scrimmage to execute these block schemes, and it's because our interior, this offensive line, has aged, and they're being asked to do something that they're underpowered for.
All right, this from the Bleacher Report. One goal for NFL's worst teams that they must accomplish in the final weeks of the 2024 season. From the Bleacher Report, for the Browns, give Elijah Moore the opportunity to earn a new contract. Cleveland has an emerging receiving room. Moore could be the final piece to solidify a group for the next few seasons. However, the Browns need to see more of the recent form before it makes sense to give him a new contract. You know, again, this kind of goes back to, we were talking about how bad the wide receiver room was before Jameis Winston took over at quarterback.
It's interesting how different these wide receivers look when you give them a chance to actually make plays on a consistent basis. And you throw to them on time. I remember that one day was a big controversy, right, where I was suggesting, hey, Deshaun's not getting this ball out on time, and that's why none of these guys look open, but they're open, right? Anyways, my grumps about that aside, yeah, I think Elijah Moore would make sense. I mean, he's not going to be too expensive, right? We're talking about somebody who might be under $5 million APY on the right deal. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of room there for Elijah Moore. He's also, 25 years old? He's super young. And we talked about this earlier with the Browns and how they're going to operate in free agency now that they have to they know that they have to work around the Watson deal, right? And part of that's going to be that they're going to take some chances on some guys that, maybe they haven't hit their peak yet, but they're younger. They're young enough to have some upside. They're cheap, and you can go ahead, lock them in for a couple of years, take a chance, and then try to roll out all the way to 2027, hopefully making some good bets in the free agency market.
All right, before we go to break, again, this one from your show. Who do you think the Browns' next Jerry Jeudy is? In other words, next potential trade target?
Evan Neal, offensive lineman out of New York. He was a former 7th overall pick, right? Remember what I said earlier. We need bigger guys on the interior. Well, this guy's big, 6'6", 350. He could play guard. He played guard at Alabama. He's been a pretty mediocre tackle so far in the NFL. You look at New York, they're gonna fire their GM. They're probably gonna fire their coach. So nobody's gonna be attached to this guy who was a former top 10 pick in that building, which means that they're probably gonna be likely to move on, especially if they want to get an upgrade at guard or tackle. They're probably gonna take it in this year's draft. So that means that there's a player going to be available. I think the Browns could take him in, give him a plan, give him a path, put him at guard, and add that size to this offensive line. You can also go out and get Mekhi Becton, do a very similar thing, who's had a good year at guard. And if you're looking at what that could look like for Evan Neal, Mekhi Becton is a great plan. Look how great he looks in Philadelphia when you see Mekhi Becton running out there. And then look at like what a lot of the teams are doing that are successful on the ground right now. The Baltimore Ravens, they're running a really big guard out there in Daniel Falele. Like it might just be that these big guards are going to be the new wave of the future here for the offensive line.
Quincy Carrier and I are going to step aside, take one more time out. On the other side of the break, we'll head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason. Sports for CLE will be right back. Stay with us. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program is dedicated to recognizing exceptional students, teachers, and schools throughout Ohio. Scan the QR code on screen to nominate students and teachers as Academic All-Stars and Teachers of the Month. They must be currently enrolled or teach in grades K through 12. Is your K through 12 school developing students' literacy skills to achieve success in reading? If so, you can nominate your school for the School of the Year. Students can win $100, teachers can win $500, and schools can win $2,500. Scan the QR code, fill out the forms, and nominate deserving students, teachers, and schools today. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program takes pride in honoring exceptional students, teachers, and schools across Ohio. Submit your nomination today. It's fun, fast, and free. We continue talking Browns with Quincy Carrier from Untitled Unfiltered Browns coverage. Let's head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason.
You know, I hear you guys are talking about if we should play DTR or not. Well, we've already seen what you got in Winston. He is what he is. And our two-time coach of the year, what are you talking about? He plays DTR. He brings him in for one play, he hands off to the guy, and then he sits him down. So he's trying. I mean, our coach of the year, that's how he plays them. He doesn't know how to play guys. I mean, what sense does it make to keep playing Winston? He supposedly shouldn't be your quarterback for next year because you know what you got. So DTR, a big pick of our general manager. I mean, he's supposed to be good, ain't he? Ask our two-time coach of the year. Like I said, all he does is let him hand off once a game. Boy, that's really good. Take care, guys.
As always, appreciate all the voicemails. Quincy, he was a fifth-round pick. Fifth-round picks don't last in the NFL very long. So if you want to say they should play DTR, what he's responding to, I said I didn't think they should play DTR. Again, you don't throw a guy out there in the regular season, and they see him every day in practice. They know what they have in DTR. That's a guy that doesn't like Andrew Berry, doesn't like Kevin Stefanski.
The thought process there too is like, hey, well, Jameis Winston's playing well, so we already know what we got there. Let's just bench him and just see what we got in DTR. I don't get it there. Look, DTR was brought in as a fifth-round pick. Maybe he becomes a backup is the big goal for that draft pick, right? You get a backup on cheap money, and maybe you luck out and he becomes a starter for you. But I think we're past the point of like knowing that this dude ain't going to be no Brock Purdy, right? It didn't take Brock Purdy this long or this many opportunities to kind of get right. So, you know, maybe he's just a backup. Maybe he's a nice, fun gadget piece. Still a good athlete. And I really don't have any problem with how the Browns use DTR.
No.
And I don't think that just because Jameis is playing well, you know what you got in him. You want to see how far you could take this thing with Jameis, right? If you're really going to evaluate if you should bring him back to start the next 17 games, right? Like, we know enough about Jameis right now to know that he could be the backup again for somebody. But do we really know enough about Jameis to know if he could be the starter? You know, I don't think we're there yet.
Yeah, here's something to think about as well. So this is comparing pressure rates between Watson and Jameis Winston. So Watson, 7 games, pressured 118 times, 33 sacks. Winston, 6 games, 5 starts, pressured 76 times, 16 sacks. The difference? Winston's getting the ball out almost half a second quicker, 3.05, 2.63. Again, that's important. That is a huge deal in the NFL.
And I think also another fun stat to track, like this is where I wish Next Gen Stats had like an available number. How many yards have those quarterbacks ran behind the line of scrimmage, right? Because that's the big issue with Deshaun. Not only does he hold the ball for a while, he's just zipping around behind the line of scrimmage like crazy, and that's creating pass rush windows for edge rushers to go and tackle him, right? Yeah, I mean, we know that the biggest issue with the team and why they were and why their record is what it is because Deshaun Watson played some historically bad football to start the year. And I want to make this point. Jameis Winston has not been playing different than what you expected Jameis Winston to look like. And Jameis Winston came into this as a well-known backup level quarterback. And he's blowing away Deshaun Watson, right? Like that's the part here that I think is interesting is that it didn't even take that much. We're not talking about going from Deshaun Watson to Joe Burrow here. We're talking about going from Deshaun Watson to 30-year-old Jameis Winston. And the difference is that start. It just screams that guy, Watson, was just incompetent at the quarterback position, and that's putting it pretty nicely. So, yeah, there's some things that need to be fixed and addressed. Anything is better, and let me make sure I'm clear on that. Any quarterback that is, like, of reasonable quality is a better option than going back to Deshaun Watson next year.
Yeah, I again, how are you going to sell that to the locker room if you're going to do that? I mean, if we can see it, the players can see it.
Yeah, it's almost impossible. Everybody's seen it. It looked like the players knew it before the season started that this is what it was with Deshaun Watson, right? It makes you even go back, Dave. Remember how rarely we saw Jameis in the preseason? We're like, that's weird that he's not playing in this game when he's just like the designated backup. And it makes you wonder, like, oh, was that on purpose? Because they didn't want you to know? I don't know. There's a lot that has been going on weird at the quarterback position, but I think this has to be the wake-up call here. I mean, Jacoby Brissett, Joe Flacco, Jameis Winston, all three of these guys have proven not to be that special outside of Cleveland, but if you compare them to Deshaun Watson, they look like the second coming. That's the biggest sign I can ever give you.
Yeah, no, you can't argue with it. You cannot argue with what you've seen. Who do you think the 2023 draft gem, might be?
Well, this 2023 draft class, I think, has been a very underrated class for Andrew Berry. Remember, that's the year they did not have a second-round pick or first-round pick. They got DeJuan Jones out of that draft class, Cedric Tillman out that draft class, Isaiah McGuire, who's been a young player who's looked good, Cam Mitchell out that draft class, and then Ronnie Hickman, who's likely going to be your starter at free safety next year, and then Mahmoud Diabate, who looks like he can play linebacker as a starter in the NFL. So, I mean, I think that whole class right there is a value shopping gem of a draft class from Andrew Berry.
Yeah, and to people that argue with, well, he hasn't drafted well, those are guys he's developed. Those guys can all play in the league. If they don't make this roster, they're going to be on another roster. What about draft prospects that you think Browns fans need to know as we get ready for the draft coming up after what's been a really disappointing regular season?
Absolutely. And just to touch on your point real quick about Andrew Berry and his draft, I just think he just needs to hit on a first-round pick, right? Like, I think that's the only thing people are waiting for is because he hasn't hit on that first-round pick, people can point that out. I always make the joke, though, if you just pretend like you drafted JOK in the first round instead of, what was it? Was it Greg Newsome that year?
Yeah, I think it was.
Like, if you just did that, then all of a sudden, nobody be wondering if he could draft anymore. But Jed Wills, Greg Newsome, that makes people nervous when they look at the first-round picks. So until he hits on the first-round pick, people are going to be nervous about it. But if you're the Browns and you want to look at guys that might be interesting in free agency, quarterback-wise, I think Carson Beck's a name to really keep your eyes on, see how he goes through this process. I think the Browns would see him as a natural fit to what they want to do, and he might be available at multiple spots for the Cleveland Browns. I think Ashawn Jeanty out of Boise State, go watch him this Friday in the Mountain West Championship. That might be somebody the Browns are interested in. Luther Burton, Ted McMillan, Isaiah Bond, Elick Ayomaner. Those are all wide receivers I think are excellent. And if we're looking at offensive lines here, keep your eye on the tackle for LSU, see what he does. He's a good guard prospect for the Cleveland Browns. And then also what Kelvin Banks is out for the rest of the season. And then Donovan Jackson's playing a completely different position. But there's going to be a ton of things to watch, especially once we get closer to the Senior Bowl, get to see these guys compete in their natural positions.
Yeah, the offense needs kind of an injection of some players, both on the line and at skill positions too, I think.
Yeah, definitely at running back, definitely at the interior of this offensive line. You could use some youth. I advocated very strongly last year for tackle. I still feel strongly about that. You could use some youth there. Wide receivers a little bit different because that's already a pretty young room, right? Like, I don't think anybody is a veteran really in that wide receiver room now that Amari Cooper is out of there. But running back needs a refresh for sure. And I would even argue, I wouldn't mind refreshing this quarterback room, even if you're still planning on bringing back Jameis or something like that. Who's going to be your backup? Because I don't think it's going to be Deshaun Watson.
Quincy Carey, as always, great stuff. Appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much, Quincy.
Just leave on that one. Y'all have a great one.
All right. Quincy Carrier, make sure you check him out. Always really good and entertaining Brown stuff. Check him out, Untitled and Unfiltered. We're going to step aside, take a quick time out. Dalton Wasserman, PFF data analyst. Straight ahead, we'll talk little college, little Browns with Dalton. That's straight ahead on Sports4CLE.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
Ted.
Hi, Betty.
Oh no, you wrapped yourself into a daze.
Holidays.
You need a break, so I got you Ohio Lotteries Home for the Holidays and Merry Money Scratch-Offs.
You could win up to $500,000 or $1 million. Oh,
thanks, hon.
And they have games on the back. Has anybody seen my glasses?
I am powerful beyond my wildest imagination.
I will define my future.
I will keep challenging myself to improve.
Because I am a future leader of this great nation.
I will be responsible for raising a beautiful family.
And educating not only my generation, but many more to come.
I will make a difference in my community.
And I will stand up for what I believe in.
I will not settle for simply chasing my dreams. I will achieve them.
Because I was given a chance.
An opportunity.
A home.
At Family, Career, and Community Leaders of America.
The ultimate leadership experience.
FCCLA has been one of the greatest experiences of my life.
It's made me who I am today.
Join us. We'll build a new future together.
We continue talking Browns on Sports4CLE. Let's head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason.
Every new team or every team goes through a regime of 5 years. If their quarterbacks don't work out, then you turn things over. It's just, unfortunately, the Browns haven't been good forever, so we have a continuance of turning things over. I mean, it's just something that we have to keep trying on. It's not an exact science on who the quarterback is going to be in the NFL draft for the right teams. But what you do need to do is draft on who you think will be the best quarterback for your team. Jaden Daniels went number 2. Then Bo Nix, who went to Denver as like the 12th selected quarterback. So, I mean, they're out there. There's plenty of quarterbacks that are going to be available in this upcoming draft. We just have to find the right guy for our team. So, I mean, our expectations are completely different.
As always, appreciate all the voicemails. Let's welcome in Dalton Wasserman, PFF data analyst, co-host of the PFF College Football Show. Dalton, the Browns have been trying to find a quarterback. They thought they added Baker Mayfield, and upon further review, that didn't quite work out. They've been trying since '99. Again, it hadn't been just 1 or 2 years. It's been 20-some.
Yeah, no, it's been tough. And I think the conundrum with this offseason is going to be just figuring out if this team is even able to support a rookie quarterback as soon as 2025, right? They have a lot of problems on offense. Now we've seen some guys emerge lately, especially Jerry Jeudy at receiver, and Cedric Tillman's had his moments. And obviously the Browns always want to get the run game going, but this is not a heavy draft with a lot of surefire quarterbacks, right? It looks like Shedeur Sanders and Cam Ward are 2 first-round picks, but I don't know if there's many others beyond that. There's a lot of guys with potential, but they also have flaws, and we're still waiting to see which of those guys is going to stay in school or not. So I think it might be better for the Browns maybe to stick with Jameis as a one-year stopgap or somebody else like that, and then keep building this roster around it, maybe load up for 2026.
Yeah, and again, you just got to figure out who you think fits into what you do. And if somebody does, you can't force it. So data for every Week 14 game, this is from PFF. Jerry Jeudy delivered a historic performance last Monday, 235 yards against the Broncos. Only the third time since 2006 that a Browns wide receiver has gone over 200 in a single game. Amari Cooper, 2022. Josh Gordon did it twice. Jeudy also most against a former team. So again, that's a guy that was taken high, and people tend to brush it over. He was drafted ahead of CeeDee Lamb and Justin Jefferson. He has talent. It's a matter of using him the proper way.
No, you're exactly right. And I think having the right quarterback throwing to him too. And you see he's getting opportunities downfield with Jameis Winston that Deshaun Watson just didn't give him. Deshaun had a really hard time throwing beyond that 10-yard mark, and Jameis has no fear of throwing anywhere on the field, as we've seen on the good side and the bad side, right? But I think with Jeudy, that's the big thing, is he's a really good route runner. He's got speed. He can do some things after the catch. That's what he was at Alabama, right? But you have to be able to have a quarterback who can get it to him downfield, and Jameis is doing a great job of it.
All right, so this from Dogs by Nature. 5 things that would turn the Browns around in 2025. Number 1, they say, give Deshaun Watson a short leash. Number 2, draft a talented young offensive tackle right off. Number 3, get offensive line coach Bill Callahan back. The editor notes that was highly unlikely, but worth noting. Make the linebacker group one of the most feared in the league. And number 5, get a stud running back. Relative to Watson, I don't know that I'd give him a short leash. I think that is an expired kind of deal. I think you just kind of move on and go from there. Young offensive tackle, I can listen to that. I think the other thing, I think you must bring back Jack Conklin. He's played really well, and you're not in a position to go looking for 2 tackles that you need.
Yeah, no, I mean, if you had Conklin and then you're talking about a top 5 or 6 pick in this NFL draft somewhere in there, it's a couple really good offensive tackles, that they're going to be high first-round picks. You talk about Kelvin Banks Jr. and Will Campbell. So I think that is a major option for them in this upcoming draft, is getting their left tackle of the future and then maybe keeping Conklin around another year or two and kind of waiting to see, about getting more depth and getting younger players as you move into the long-term future here. But I think that's probably the first priority for me. We know what the Watson situation is. You're going to be stuck with him for next year and then getting rid of him and starting over. But the offensive line is a big problem, and I think it is aging. And Conklin, yes, he's playing well, but it's not going to be in the long-term plans to have all those older guys around. So I think that's where it starts on the offensive line. Then you got to build the rest of the offense around it.
And relative to the linebacker group, one of the most feared in the league, that's kind of not how this defense operates. They're get cover guys that can play man-to-man and get after it with your line. Stud running back, I can't argue that. The question is, where are you going to get somebody relative to draft position that can make an impact?
Well, we've seen it a lot at the running back position, that late round picks and even undrafted guys become really good players. And this is as deep a running back class as we've had in a while. I mean, there's certain guys that I think are going to go in the 4th and 5th round this year that could have gone on day 2 last year. There's top end talent. There's a lot of depth. I think that might even be the easiest part to find out of anything on this list, because there's so many talented players in this draft. I think even if they don't get one, there's a couple of backs that are in first round consideration, but even if they don't get one of those guys, they're going to have an opportunity to take some swings at that position.
Who are some of the guys that you think later that, kind of open your eye? Because I know you're a co-host of the PFF College Football Show. Who are some of the running backs that kind of you think could be later round guys that are huge value picks?
So I think when you talk about, we'll start, I think for the Browns, it might even start at the top of the second round if they could get an Amarion Hampton or a Quinshon Judkins in that range. But even on day, round 3 or later, or day 3 guys, you're talking about Devin Neal from Kansas, DJ Giddens from Kansas State, RJ Harvey from UCF. There's so many guys in this draft. I don't even remember them all sometimes, honestly. The running back, so many of the great running backs that were in college football last season in 2023 that came back this year, and it shows. The Jonah Coleman from Washington is another one that we just have so much depth at this position right now coming into this year's draft. I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities, especially on day 3, to get guys who are a steal. And you're seeing for us, actually, the highest graded rookie in football is Bucky Irving for Tampa Bay, who went in round 4. So those steals can be found on day 3 at this position.
Dalton Wasserman, PFF data analyst, co-host of the PFF College Football Show, and I are going to step aside, take a quick time out. We'll head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason when we return. Sports4CLE will be right back.
Ted.
Hi, Betty.
Oh, no, you wrapped yourself into a daze.
Holidays.
You need a break, so I got you Ohio Lotteries Home for the Holidays and Merry Money Scratch-Offs.
You could win up to $500,000 or $1 million. Oh,
thanks, hon.
And they have games on the back. Has anybody seen my glasses?
We continue talking college football with Dalton Wasserman, PFF data analyst, co-host, PFF College Football Show. Let's head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason.
Hi, this is James calling about Ryan Day and the state of Ohio State football. I think we need to talk about the case for replacing Day with Mike Vrabel. Day has now lost 4 straight to Michigan, including the most embarrassing upset in the 127-year rivalry as a 3-touchdown favorite. Yes, Day's overall record is 66-10, but he's just 1-4 against Michigan and hasn't won a national championship. I think Mike Vrabel is the perfect replacement. He's a beloved alum who already has coaching experience with the program as a former linebacker and defensive line coach. And as an NFL head coach, he's proven he can develop talent and build a winning culture. Yes, the $37 million buyout for Day is steep, but Vrabel is currently available and wouldn't require a buyout of his own. The time is right to bring in a coach who understands the importance of beating Michigan and can restore Ohio State's dominance in the rivalry, and Vrabel is that guy.
As always, appreciate all of the voicemails. Dalton, there's 2 things. Most Ohio State fans are ready to move on from Ryan Day. I'm not sure that Mike Vrabel would want to coach college. College in the NIL era, man, there are not a lot of guys that are running from the NFL to sign up for that. There's also another thing that comes to mind. Ohio State doesn't put a value in this is going to piss off Ohio State fans. I get it. They don't put a value on recruiting Ohio anymore. Ever since Urban Meyer, they go out and they recruit nationally. They're going into Florida, they're going into California, they're going into Texas, and they're coming out with recruits. Those recruits don't come to Ohio State necessarily to beat Michigan. They come here to win national championships. Now, it's true, Day hasn't won that. That's still on the table this year. But there's a whole changing dynamic that a lot of people in Ohio don't want to admit.
Yeah, no, you're right. And I mean, I think this isn't just Ohio State. This is all across the country. And rivalries are still great, but I think it's something the dynamic has changed. You mentioned the recruiting and just the world we live in, right? It's much easier to get a plane ticket nowadays and see your family. It's cell phones are, they've brought the communication to it. It's not like the old days where kids could only call their parents on a payphone. So I think it's a little bit different where you have kids that are willing to go coast to coast and far away. If they want a quarterback from California, they can go get them. So it's a different era of recruiting you're living in. Then you mentioned it. Now that you have the playoff, especially, we're not going to get that scenario where the winner of Michigan, Ohio State might decide who wins the national title, right? The days where they used to be 1 and 2 in the country. And that could still be possible. But with the way we have a bracket now and everything, I think it's very hard with this Ohio State team to understand all of the goals because, yes, they failed again in beating Michigan. But you mentioned it. The national title is right in front of them. They have a boatload of talent. If they go and win a national title, well, you can't go and get rid of Ryan Day after winning a trophy like that. I know, again, beating Michigan's a part of the job. It's a special part of the job. But it's very strange how we have two different dynamics here and two different types of goals here with this program.
The other thing is, you know, with the Big Ten expanding, it's USC, it's UCLA, it's Oregon. That's kind of diluting, and Ohio State fans don't want to hear it. It's diluting the Ohio State-Michigan because you're now coast to coast as a conference.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I think the entire nation is coast to coast when you think about it. There's just so few programs that are recruiting exclusively from in-state. And I think Texas is one of the last ones, and even they're starting to branch out in that sense. You have to do it. You have to go get guys from different areas. You're not just going to build an entire national championship winning roster nowadays with as much talent as is out there with just guys in your state, right? It's not localized like it used to be. And I don't know that it's diluted so much. It's just that it's a different meaning, right? It's not. I think when you have the playoff system, one loss doesn't make or break you, and I think that was maybe part of the fun of it. You know, in the older days of this rivalry, that's not that long ago, but pre-playoff. But I think it's just a thing where they're two separate goals now, as opposed to it used to be that Ohio State beating Michigan was a requirement for going and trying to win a national title. Now they could lose to Michigan and still have a realistic chance, like they do this year.
And the other thing is you know, Harbaugh lost to Ohio State a number of years and then ended up coming back, beating them, winning a national championship.
Yeah, no, I mean, and that's what you're talking about. It still takes a long time to build these things, right? And this is going to be the debate with Ohio State. There's been all the talk about the $20 million roster, and can you buy a roster overnight? Now, a lot of these guys came back from last year. I do think that's overblown. There's a few pieces with Downs and Judkins and even Will Howard, the quarterback. I get it, but you know, Michigan wasn't known for, you know, NIL and portal and all that stuff. They really recruited from within and developed within, right? So it's two different mindsets, and all the Michigan people are going to say, well, ours works better than yours, but it's a combination of both, right? Ohio State's developed a lot of their own guys, and they just have to. To me, it looks like, especially with this last game, it looks like a mental hurdle with Ohio State now. There's really no logical reason they should have lost this matchup with as much better as they were as Michigan through the majority of the year. I think it's really a mental hurdle now, and we're going to see a Michigan team that they got the number one high school quarterback recruit in the country coming in. It's not going to get any easier.
All right, so the college football playoff bracket was released. Ohio State, after the loss to Michigan, fell to 6th in the rankings. They end up in the 8th slot, so they get a home game against Tennessee in the first round in this incarnation of it. It'll be finalized Sunday. You mentioned, you talked a little bit about it. How concerning is what you saw from the Buckeyes against Michigan relative to what will likely be a first-round playoff game?
So aside from all the Ohio State-Michigan pageantry, there is a major problem on the field, and that's their offensive line. We've seen multiple guys suffer season-ending injuries, right? Seth McLaughlin, Josh Simmons. They're moving Donovan Jackson out to left tackle. They got backups playing inside. This is the biggest problem I have with their national title chances, their offensive line. Tennessee's got a great defensive front. If you play Georgia, they have a great defensive front. Oregon has a great one. Penn State. There's a lot of these teams that, look, if you make the playoffs and you're near the top of college football, you're going to be really good in the trenches. And Ohio State's offensive line, ever since Josh Simmons got hurt in the Oregon game especially, that's what would concern me the most, is their ability to block elite defensive lines. And a lot of teams in this playoff field have it.
All right, before I let you go, what games you paying attention to, conference championship games? Who has the most to gain? Who has the most to lose?
There's a ton of teams with the most to gain, especially when you look at the Big 12, and I think the Mountain West title game on Friday is going to be fascinating. Boise State and UNLV, they played a great game the first time they played. Two really good teams. Ashton Ginty, who's going to be a Heisman finalist for Boise, but UNLV's got a great football team, and the winner's going to the playoffs. Same thing in the Big 12 with Arizona State and Iowa State. And the last thing, I'm really curious to see how Texas responds in a rematch against Georgia after getting dominated the first time around. If Quinn Ewers, this really, I think, is kind of the game for his legacy now, because he hasn't played great football down the stretch here ever since that Georgia game, and that was the worst game of his career. So I'm curious to see what we get out of Texas in a rematch.
When you look at it, 12 teams will have a chance to win the national championship. Is there, you could make the case for 4 or 5 different teams. I don't think there's a, boy, they can't miss. Even unbeaten Oregon, I would say, there's some questions there.
Yeah, there's definitely not a prohibitive favorite like we've had in past years, but I think right now, I think Oregon, we have to consider the favorite. They are undefeated, got a very well-rounded football team. I think I can point to a lot of other teams and go, that is the weakness that could bring them down. I don't know if I have that with Oregon. Now, is there ceiling, on any given day? Is there, are there times they struggle in the red zone, and there's certain times with their offensive line? Yeah, but I think they're at least the least flawed team right now. And I do look at Texas too, at their quarterback situation. If Quinn plays a little bit better than he's been playing, or if we see a scenario where they turn to Arch Manning, I think that's also a dangerous team that doesn't have a ton of flaws, but they have the biggest one that might be the quarterback problem. That's why I'm so curious to see Texas against Georgia again.
Dalton Wasserman, as always, great stuff. Appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much, Dalton.
Appreciate it, as always, Dave. Thank you.
Dalton Wasserman, make sure you check him out. Always really good stuff. Co-host of the PFF College Football Show. That's going to do it for this edition of Sports for CLE. We'll see you back here tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Have a great night, everybody. See you tomorrow at 4 on Sports for CLE.